Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Katz, and welcome to Tuesday's edition of WeAreSC.com's Inside the Trojans Huddle, where we tell it like it is. Friends, Inside the Trojans Huddle is a game-like panel discussion, which we posted on Tuesdays during the season and features WeAreSC columnists, staff writers, and historians. We first start off with the pregame show, where we introduce our panel members for this edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle, and then give you the latest USC football news. Now let's meet today's panelists. A WeAreSC columnist who writes WeAreSC.com's The Monday Morass, Yay or Nay, and Sunday Takeaways. In addition to regular season football and basketball reports, he also hosts his own podcast show entitled Locked On USC. That's Marc Kulkin. The editor-in-chief of WeAreSC.com, columnist, national recruiting guru, and a graduate of USC, Erik McKinney. A former William Jewell college defensive back and WeAreSC columnist, who writes the popular WeAreSC.com column Musings with Arledge, and now has his own WeAreSC.com video show, Musings with Arledge Solo Edition, and a graduate of the USC Law School. That's Chris Arledge. And finally, a weekly WeAreSC columnist who writes Fridays The Obvious and Not So Obvious, IMHO Sunday, and is an active member of the Football Writers Association of America. Your moderator and producer of Inside the Trojans Huddle, Greg Katz. Before we kick off this Tuesday's edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle, here's a recap of the latest USC football news. In the first USA Today's coaches preseason poll of the 2023 season, Trojans are ranked number 6 in the country, behind number 1 Georgia, number 2 Michigan, number 3 Alabama, number 4 Ohio State, and number 5 LSU. USC held a recent scrimmage, and Lincoln Riley gave an assessment. More on that in the first quarter of the huddle. And for all intents and purposes, sorry to say, the Pac-12 conference is basically dead, with USC and UCLA, Oregon, and Washington headed to the Big Ten, Colorado, Utah, ASU, and Arizona being accepted in the Big 12. And it was publicly learned on Monday that Stanford and Cal have had contacts regarding a potential move to the ACC. No word yet, however, on the future of Oregon State and Washington State. And in recruiting news, the Trojans learned on Monday that class of 2024 safety Dakota Fields, who had earlier committed to the Trojans, has decommitted and announced for Oregon. Friends, a reminder that the recruiting division of WeAreSC.com, headed by Scott Schrader and assisted by Marshall Levinson, can be read daily during the week for our premium subscribers. And don't forget to watch the new Monday WeAreSC.com video recruiting roundup show with Scott Schrader and host Dylan Brazier. And friends, WeAreSC's Inside the Trojans Huddle greatly appreciates your viewer and listenership. And we strongly encourage those of you watching on sites like YouTube to click on the like button and the red subscriber buttons. Greatly valued, appreciated, and it is free. You can also listen to Inside the Trojans Huddle on many available podcast sites. And a reminder, WeAreSC.com is offering access to our site, just $9.99 for $1 per month. Again, $9.99 per month, or $99.99 for a full 1-year subscription. You won't want to miss the site that really does tell it like it is and shoot straight with USC football and college football fans in general. So with that, let's kick this baby off for the first half of the huddle with a series of questions. First of all, panel, the Trojans held a recent scrimmage, and Lincoln Riley made a number of comments on that. And where we are in the third week of training camp, what are your takeaways from being down there or watching it? Or what concerns do you have that you've heard about the scrimmage or in general? Just where are the Trojans in training camp at this point? Our leadoff hitter, as always, Marc Kulkin. Marc, where are we at this point?
So Lincoln Riley thinks they're in a really good place. Trojan fans might be surprised to hear that Coach Riley said the defense won the scrimmage. And the reason for that was they made less mistakes and were more consistent. Now, does that mean everybody should be concerned about USC's offense? Absolutely not. That's probably Coach Riley building up the defense. I'm not saying they didn't win the day, but he went on to highlight some of the players who had good days. Zion Branch with a pick 6. He forced a fumble. Jacoby Lane was another name that popped out from him. I think at this point of fall camp, whether it's week 2, week 3, they're more than halfway through, and they're kicking off against San Jose State August 26th. The fact that he's highlighting the defense and they're feeling really positive about that, I think that's where they want to be at this point of fall camp, coming out of their first scrimmage.
Erik, what's your take? You've been down there, you've watched it, you listened to the interview today. Is SC in good shape? Is the defense that good? What's going on there?
There's really one thing I think that I take away from where USC is now, and just kind of compiling everything that everybody has said. Now Lincoln Riley, you go back to last fall, and he was really complimentary of the defense, and coaches are always going to do that. Oh, we had some back and forth. The defense won this. Defense looked great, and then we saw sort of what the defense was that year. So I don't really need to hear, oh, the defense is good. Oh, they outplayed the offense, anything like that. But what does stand out to me is kind of the consistently that we are hearing from offensive linemen, from offensive line coach Josh Henson, from defensive linemen, and from defensive line coach Sean Nua, that the defensive line is more active and has that kind of tenacity. Again, I don't care about, oh, there were this many sacks in a scrimmage where you can't touch the quarterback. That doesn't mean anything. But when you hear kind of over and over, the defensive line is playing with an intensity and an energy level that just kind of overwhelms what I think we all feel like is going to be a pretty good offensive line, that one aspect of it kind of catches my attention. And then when you look, and it's new guys, it's returners kind of with that chip on their shoulder, and the depth that you see kind of at different positions on the defensive line, it's not right. You're never going to buy all the way into the USC defense until you start to see it on the field, and probably start to see it on the field against good offenses later in the year. But I think there is a sense that this is a completely new defensive line, new players, new attitude, all of that. And that's something that I think I'm taking away at this point is I think they do have something on the defensive line. And more importantly, I think they feel like they have something on the defensive line. And behind them, you hear Mason Cobb talk about kind of the juice, the energy that the defense has. And that's kind of what stands out to be more so than any kind of statistical number or anything like that you can put on it. There's a feel, I think, for the defense that definitely feels different than last year.
Chris, what's your sense of what happened today in terms of what Lincoln Riley said, or your overall general feelings about what information you've been able to glean?
I'm on the same page that Marc and Erik are. Look, we all knew going into this season that USC was going to be really good offensively, and the real question was whether USC would be solid up front. The impression I get from Lincoln Riley is that they've been more than solid; they've been downright good, and we'll know more when the season starts. But it sounds like Bear Alexander is currently running with the twos, and that tells you something. Right? I mean, that you're talking about a guy who was an elite prospect, who played really well as a true freshman for the program that is the best defensive program in the country right now. Now, do I think he'll probably make his way into the starting lineup at some point? Probably, but he hasn't yet. That tells you something. Lincoln Riley seems giddy about where things are right now. He's a football coach, and football coaches always worry. Football coaches always have other things that you need to get better at, of course. But you listen to him talk, and this is not a guy who thinks they're going to go out and struggle defensively. Maybe he'll be wrong. He is not a guy who thinks that right now. And yes, he did talk last year about how well the defense was doing some things. He also told us going into last year that he thought this was he was very positive. I'm not gonna try to quote him. He thought that was going to be a really good football team and win a lot of games, right? He thought that right away. It turns out he was right. He was more right than most of us would have expected him to be. Lincoln Riley thinks he's got a good defense. And if Lincoln Riley has a good defense, then he has a hell of a football team. That's the reality. And USC is going to be very, very difficult to beat if that defensive line is as good as the chatter is.
Well, it's interesting. I was just on a ESPN show that covers the Southeast Conference, and they were all saying about, of course, the offense. But the big question that everybody has, of course, is the defense. It was so bad last year that could they get into the playoffs this year with the same defense? No, not really. But if the defense is good enough, average at best, they stand a good shot at it. But, you know, I listened and watched the, Riley's overall assessment, and look, he wants people to have some hope about his defense. And, you can make comments about your defense at the time you make them. Let's face it, their first 6 games aren't exactly, equal to the last 6 games. So if you really say the defense is going to be tested, it will be tested beginning at Notre Dame. I think that they're better, just personnel wise, they're better. I'm not prepared to say that, this is what their defense is. I think Bear Alexander may be running second team because maybe he had a soft tissue injury that was alluded to last week or so. But, I'm hopeful. I like, what I'm hearing, seeing. I like listening to Mason Cobb. In some ways, Mason Cobb could be the Lofa Tatupu of this team. Coming in, remember Lofa came in from Maine and made an immediate impact not only by his play, but his attitude. I kind of see the same thing with Mason Cobb, and that's certainly a big plus. So I think we'll wait and see. I will wait and see just to see how these lesser teams move the ball. Are we going to see silly penalties? So I guess I'm a little bit more restrained. I'm not saying they're going to be below average, but I just want to see what happens after 6 games, and then of course Notre Dame. So with that, let's move on. What true freshmen on offense and defense have caught your attention, and some of the names in training camp that have surfaced that may have surprised you? Maybe they haven't. Mark, who are you hearing about the freshmen? Who's standing out here?
Well, Chris, what you were alluding to with Coach Riley, said he didn't want to put any limitations on the team last year, and they obviously, I think, surpassed pretty much everybody's thought of what was going to happen. But Greg, your question, the offensive line immediately is popping into my head when I'm thinking about the true freshmen. Elijah Page, I think everybody has pegged second string left tackle, but the last couple of practices, Alani Noah's been running what appears to be second string left guard. And that, is interesting because that just means that offensive line room is really deep, and they have Josh Henson trusts the freshman class. And I think Eric made this comment when we were standing around at practice today that this freshman class might be similar to Pete Carroll's. What year were you? Did you say, Eric?
I mean, some of the bad. I mean that 03 class, right?
Yeah, it was the 03 class
put up there. I don't know if it's that yet, but you look at potential starters down the line.
Yeah,
it's going to fill a lot of holes.
Yeah, they're going to make a lot. They're going to make an impact this season. And then Taka Curtis is really starting to float up to the top with the defense, as far as he's probably going to be in that 2 deep. And when you hear the coaches talk, they're not going to put any limitations on him as well. And then coming out of the scrimmage again, you've got I think the first player that Riley mentioned was Jacoby Lane on offense. And I read what Eric wrote after today's practice, and he's just that guy that, he might have that baby face, but you probably don't want to get in a fight with him because he's going to win. He's got that type of attitude. So yeah, to me, it's this freshman class is going to make an impact. How much they play, we'll find out as the season goes along. But On defense, Tackett Curtis. Offense, Alani Noah. The fact that he's already moved up into that second rotation 2 days in a row.
Just for clarification, Mark, inform our viewers or listeners who are not that familiar with Alani Noah. What position do they have him slotted at? I know, but for purposes of information.
He's been running at left guard.
Okay. Erik, you agree with what Mark said? Who are you hearing? What are you agreeing with? Your overall thoughts on the freshman who's standing out?
Yeah, you could go down the list, really. I mean, it's a bunch of guys. I think in terms of who we're going to see quite a bit of, like a lot of the guys that came in as early enrollees in the spring are kind of forgotten about as true freshmen now. It feels like they've been here for a long time. But I mean, Zachariah Branch is the guy on offense, right? Of the true freshmen, he's the guy who's going to make the biggest impact, maybe on either side of the ball. He looks like he is ready to go. He's there among kind of all the vets at one of those inside receiver positions. He's going to make an impact. I think maybe as a surprise, Mark mentioned Jacoby Lane. That's one of those things where players make plays, right? You throw the ball out, you put it in a scrimmage, that guy is going to make plays. And if you had to line up all four of those true freshman receivers coming in, and that's Branch, Mekhi Lemon, Deuce Robinson, and Jacoby Lane, I don't know if anybody would have put Lane anything other than fourth in terms of that group where they were ranked kind of in the rankings coming in. But he's a guy, Caleb Williams first mentioned him last week. Lincoln Riley mentioned him today, just making plays. And you know, I said on our message board, I saw him 2 summers ago at a 7-on-7 event, just in a loaded game against South Florida Express. That team had wide receivers everywhere. Jacoby Lane for his Tucson Turf team made play after play after play, and they ended up winning that game. That's the kind of guy that he is. And again, kind of super underrated in this class coming in with all of those other big time receivers. Defensively, same thing, right? The spring guys kind of get forgotten about as being true freshmen, but Christian Pierce is a guy who's going to play. Tackett Curtis is the obvious guy. Sam Green we've talked about, and sorry, Chris, not to take all of them, but defensive lineman Elijah Hughes. He's, I think, the Jacoby Lane of the other side, where all of a sudden his name's popping up as, hey, this is a guy that comes out to play. Jack Sullivan today called him pretty raw, but really loves that motor, which again is something that we talked about seeing from him as a recruit and what he was going to bring to USC. So you just keep going down the list. There's probably 5 or 6 guys that we still haven't mentioned that could make an impact this year.
Chris, I noticed that Erik brought one of your favorite freshmen, so I'm sure you're glad to hear about Elijah Hughes.
Yeah, well, look, last year the recruiting class was ranked just inside the top 10, and I think it got dinged a little bit because the offensive linemen and the defensive linemen weren't that highly regarded by the recruiting services. But I think a lot of USC fans who paid attention to the film and the offer sheets looked at it and said, I think these guys are going to be a lot better than people think they're going to be. And I think Sam Green and Elijah Hughes were the poster boys for that, right? And Green comes in and really opened some eyes in the spring. And now I think Hughes is starting to do the same in the fall. I don't know if this is going to be a 2003 recruiting class. That was a Hall of Fame class. You go look at that. I mean, when you look at the best recruiting classes of all time, the 2003 USC class is always up there in the top 5. I don't know if they're going to be that, but I'll say this: there are a lot of really good football players in that group, right? I mean, a lot of we didn't talk about the running backs right now, and I don't know if the running backs are surprised. I don't know how much they're going to play, but those 2 kids can really play. In fact, they're so good that Rayleigh Brown doesn't play running back anymore, and he's good. Right. I mean, he's going to be a problem for people to slot, but everybody's going to be a problem for people to slot because USC has all kinds of slot receivers that are fast and shifty and dangerous. It looks like it's a really good freshman class. Erik did go through every single member of the freshman class, and so I don't need to do that. But I'm thrilled. all the guys we're talking about are fantastic. And at the end of this year, the two standouts are going to be Tackett Curtis and Zachariah Branch. Those two guys are going to play a lot. They're future All-Americans, they're future very high draft choices. But they're going to have a lot of other guys in that same class that turn out to be excellent football players. So it was, I thought it was probably a really good recruiting class. And the more we hear about some of these guys, the more I think that Riley's class may be a little bit underrated. And this may be the sort of class that really helps turn the program around.
Yeah, I think it's some of it was, but I was surprised by who was named. When we talk about recruiting, we're always saying, well, maybe it's somebody's overhyped, or is it really worth it to have a big recruiting battle on any particular player? But, if you go back to the recruiting of Jacoby Lane and the struggle, they were trying to make sure they got him. And now who's the first guy really that we've known in a scrimmage that really got the attention of Lincoln Riley? It was Jacoby Lane, because he's so tall, he can high point the ball. But the one name we didn't hear about, well, a couple of names we didn't hear about. We didn't hear a lot about Zachariah Branch, number one. At least I didn't. And also we didn't hear much about Deuce Robinson. But we did hear about Jacoby Lane. And Jacoby Lane, I think, is guys verify for me of this. He's 6'4.5", 6'4", 6'5", something in that vicinity. And that was the name that was brought up. Defensively, it was amazing that you did hear Elijah Hughes' name brought up. I mean, I think we were all sold based on what we saw. The fact that he's raw, I think that was what Jack Sullivan said, means he's got a lot of talent. He's got potential. Potential is unproven talent. But the thing about him is, either you got a motor or you don't got a motor. Sometimes some guys can kick it into gear. They mature. But if you got a guy that loves the game, like this kid apparently does, you got to say, as soon as he gets the fundamentals taught to him by Coach Nua, he could leap out at people. Tackett Curtis, of course, is no surprise to anybody. He's right there. He's always going to be right there. And I'm sure that LSU, no matter how highly they get ranked, they will always remember that Tackett Curtis did not come to LSU. So it sounds good, at least initially, with the freshman class. So moving on, this past weekend, the Trojans lost their second commitment of the summer when class of 2024 safety Dakota Fields flipped from the Trojans to Oregon. Earlier, offensive lineman Manasseh Etiti flipped from the Trojans to Florida State. Panel, how concerned are you about these flips? Do they make sense to you at this point for the class of 2024's recruiting cycle? What is going on, Marc Kulkin?
So am I concerned? I mean, no, from a perception standpoint, obviously it's not a good look. But when you peel back the layers and you kind of understand what's going on behind the scenes and how NIL works, it is what it is. And unless USC wants to change their philosophy with high school recruiting and how aggressive they want to be playing that type of game, they're probably going to be the bridesmaid often. Now, as far as Dakota Fields is concerned, is it coincidental that he decided to make his flip announcement after Oregon, kind of got on their knees and said, we'll come to the Big Ten if you even give us less than half of what everybody else is getting? I think that played a role in his decision. And because you have to imagine all these West Coast kids are thinking, well, where are these schools going to be playing? And, what am I going to be looked at if I'm playing in a lesser conference? So short term, I think USC has to kind of maybe go back to the drawing board and say, how do we want to address these types of things? But with the transfer portal out there.
Interrupting, Mark, but so for clarification, I know where you're going with this, and I agree. But I think you're alluding to NIL competition. Is that what
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, thanks for making me lose my train of thought. I appreciate that.
Try not to do.
With the transfer portal, I think that's always going to be, Lincoln Riley's saving grace. He has been able to go to it now 2 times, and what he did with it this offseason to supplement the defense, you're always going to be able to fill that hole where someone decided, you know what, maybe USC's depth chart isn't for me, and they're thinking of other things rather than team first. I'm not overly concerned about it, but again, from a optics point of view, you know, it's again, it's one of those things where Oregon kind of gets to say neener, neener, neener. We're having a really good day today. You guys get to deal with it now. So it's just those types of things.
So Erik, do you agree with Marc on this one? The NIL is the problem with not only Fields, but Titi. I mean, a guy coming from, I think, Modesto to go all the way to you know, Tallahassee, out of, I guess you can't say nowhere because, you know, obviously it was an undercurrent going on, but is the NIL going to be the issue here with commits and decommits for USC?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a big part of it. I mean, Lincoln Riley seems totally fine with it. I'm sure that he'd like to have a lot of these guys on the field. Now, is Dakota Fields, and I don't mean this anything about specifically Dakota Fields, I'm just using the name. Is having Dakota Fields on your roster guaranteeing you a national championship? No. And the truth is that none of these guys are, right? You have to put together your best roster for that year. And the transfer portal lets you do that in a completely different way now. If you look at the guys that are pretty well locked in USC's recruiting class, and I'm talking about the 24 class right now, that's fine. I mean, what they have right now is fine. Yeah, I'm sure that USC coaches and fans especially want them to add a bunch of guys and get up into that top 2, top 3 nationally, but you can bring in this group, go get a bunch of guys in the transfer portal, which Lincoln Riley has already proven that he absolutely knows how to do, and put together a roster that can go get you to the playoff. So nowadays, when you really have to take into account how is this guy going to fit culturally in the locker room, what is he looking for, all of that kind of stuff, some of these guys make your decisions a lot easier for you. And again, I'm not saying that they're making the wrong decision, because they're after sort of what they're after at this point. But no, I mean, Georgia misses out on guys, Alabama misses out on guys. Like, not everybody gets every single person that they want. I do think, again, if Lincoln Riley could sit there at the very beginning of the cycle and pencil out his 20 to 25 high school football recruits that he would want to get, USC is going to end up with fewer of that group because of NIL. And again, and he has said repeatedly and pretty forcefully, fine, we're going this way, and the guys that show up are the guys that show up.
Chris, are you concerned about the decommitments? How do you see it? Is Lincoln Riley doing the right thing in saying we're not going to get into some sort of bidding war on the NIL level? What's your take?
I think he's probably doing the right thing. It's a little bit frustrating sometimes because Lincoln Riley's not going to have Pete Carroll type high school classes in the day of NIL if he's not willing to write checks to these kids. He's just not. But the game has changed since Pete left, and in light of the ability to fill holes in your roster, not with unproven true freshmen, but with guys who have proven themselves and can step right in and be starters, it just may not matter as much. And look, if you look at the programs that have been very aggressive with their NIL, Texas A&M being the poster boy, it's not entirely clear that their plan has worked, right? So Lincoln Riley may be right about this. The other thing I'd say is that Oregon is built to recruit, right? I mean, they are a marketing operation. They're known for their uniforms. They're known for their fancy buildings. They went out and hired a young head coach who's known as a very good recruiter, who surrounded himself with a bunch of other young coaches who are known as very good recruiters, some of which I don't think can even coach a lick, but they're unbelievable salesmen. And Oregon is willing to give out bags of cash. So Oregon is built to recruit. right now, Oregon and Utah and other programs are able to assert that they are on the same level as USC. I don't think that's going to last. I think USC is going to separate themselves from those programs. And when they do, then that argument goes away and USC will lose less guys to the other schools. But they're still going to lose some guys, because if you're not giving out money and other people are, then you're going to lose. The other thing is, do I want to say it? Yeah, I'll say it. Look, if you're trying to figure out whether you're going to bring somebody into your new conference, somebody who can probably move the needle on TV ratings in a positive way, and Oregon can, right? I mean, more people would rather watch Oregon, Indiana, or Illinois. Oregon's going to be able to put together some pretty attractive football games in the Big Ten. But if you do that with a program that has decided that they don't care that the NCAA says you're not supposed to do pay for play, and they do it anyway, consistently and aggressively, then you're going to lose some recruits to that program. Would you be better off letting that program die in a ditch, or the Mountain West? Probably. But USC didn't do that. So they're going to have to deal with this for a very long time, or at least until Phil Knight stops giving money or goes away, right? So it is what it is. They're going to lose some guys. Fortunately, I don't think USC has lost anybody to Oregon that is a difference maker. I'm not saying they're not good football players, right? They're good football players, but they're guys you can replace. You can replace Dakota Fields. And that's not a knock on him, because you can replace almost everybody. There are very few guys you can't, right? You can't replace Caleb Williams. You can't. There isn't another Caleb Williams. I'm not convinced you can replace Zachariah Branch, but we'll see in the next couple of years whether you can. But most of the guys that are good players, you can replace them, and you'll be able to replace them with somebody who's in the same class, who has spent a year or two somewhere else and who's already developed, has already proven, and that's okay.
Well, I'm concerned about it. I don't like to see any player from Southern California that SC is recruiting go somewhere else. I don't want to see, the old addition by subtraction or any of that type of thing, or reverse. I think Dakota Fields always wanted to go to Oregon. I think that when Oregon was accepted into the Big Ten, I think that made him want to go back up and take a trip. I think that's where his heart was. Obviously, that's where his heart was. I didn't really get Ititi. That one I just didn't understand. SC's put together a pretty good foundation for the class of 2024 in terms of offensive linemen, and I just go, where did that one come from? So there might be an underscore on that one, where how the connection there, because it just seemed like that one didn't make sense to me. But I think the point's well taken. Were these guys difference makers? Well, you know what? They're still great talents. I think just because they don't go to SC doesn't mean all of a sudden they go from 4-star to a 1-star. But we're going to talk about this a little bit later. Let's move on. Halftime, guys. We know what's happened with this realignment and so on and so forth. Now you got 4 power teams from the Pac-12. They're now in the Big Ten. How do you think the new Big Ten affects the Rose Bowl going forward, or does it, Chris?
The Rose Bowl is not the same, but it hasn't been for some years, and now it's not even close. It'll still be, it's still a famous name, and it will still look beautiful on television, but it's not the same. It just isn't. It's not the Rose Bowl that we grew up with, and that was true before the 4 best Pac-12 teams went to the Big Ten. So the Rose Bowl is the Orange Bowl, it's the Sugar Bowl, it's the other major bowls. That's all it is now, and we may not like that very much. Those of us who grew up rooting for USC and watching them play in the Big Ten and thinking that game was special, it was. It's not anymore. It's just not. So that's one of the things that we lose when college football changes.
Mark, do you see the Rose Bowl changing at all moving forward with the additions to the Big Ten?
It's like Chris said, right now it's just a venue. It's a place where they're going to play games. The playoffs will be there this year. How do you continue to have the Rose Bowl when your Pac-4, it's the big conference versus your representative from Oregon State, Washington State, Cal, and Stanford. That's not a bowl. That's not a bowl affiliation. So it's not just the Rose Bowl that's actually being affected. There's all the other, ancillary bowls that have to kind of realign as well now. Chris said it, the bowl games, they're gone as far as what they really are. Fortunately, USC will get to play there every other year. And hopefully, maybe one way someday, USC and Cal can play in a Rose Bowl game. And man, talk about history, right?
And that would be bad history. Eric, what do you think?
Yeah, the Rose Bowl stopped being the Rose Bowl, right? What was that, all the way back when Texas played in it? I mean, that it's been a long time since it's been kind of what everybody grew up with it being. So maybe there's an outside shot that the Big Ten every 5 years or something wants to host the Big Ten championship game at the Rose Bowl, which would be kind of a fun thing. But I imagine that Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, those kind of more traditional Big Ten schools would not be happy about moving that out of the Midwest footprint there. But no, it's part of the playoff this year. Then it's part of the 12-team playoff going forward. So yeah, it would be, if USC happens to land in there, it would be great, right? Would every USC fan rather watch USC in the Rose Bowl for that game than in the Sugar Bowl or the Fiesta Bowl? I'm sure. But no, what the Rose Bowl sort of always was is done. And even the Rose Bowl kind of had to admit to that by giving up all of the things it wanted in moving forward and being part of the playoff package.
Well, I think the Rose Bowl, because of the parade affiliation, the tradition of it, I think will always be a respected tradition of college football. I agree that it took a lot of getting used to for the Rose Bowls in recent years, of course, not hosting the Big Ten versus the Pac-12. That took a little adjusting to, but it's how they decide. College football has to, and so I know there's so much money to be made, but they have to integrate the Rose Bowl into a process. Now they would argue, but it is like the semifinals for the college football playoffs is this season. USC theoretically could stand a good shot at getting the Rose Bowl if they get into the playoffs, depending on how they're seeded. But I was reading an article that I thought was I was already sold, so it's preaching to the choir. It'd be nice if the Rose Bowl was the site of the national championship game, kind of like Williamsport is the site of the Little League World Series. There's nothing Little League about the Rose Bowl, but somehow keep it in coordination. Now it was brought up that maybe the Big Ten could have a championship game there. So my first thought was they would argue, well, you know what, I could see expanding it, but let's play it at SoFi Stadium, like they do for the Big Ten. They played in Indianapolis at Lucas Oil Field, I believe it's called. And the fact that UCLA plays the Rose Bowl, if UCLA happen to get into it, they'd say they've got a home field advantage. I don't think that's true, but I think that would be the argument for it. But hopefully they will still keep the Rose Bowl in good standings in the tradition of it. So with that, let's move forward. As we watch all the realignment changes taking place across the country, should the college football playoffs expand from 14 teams to 16 teams at this point? Now, granted, we're late in the process for this season, but in the future, should it have been based on these super conferences that are evolving? Should it go to 16 teams, Chris?
No, it's 12 teams, not 14 right now, but it shouldn't go to, but 12 teams is probably too many. 16 is too many. I haven't looked to see at the lower levels how often the 16 seed has actually won the national title. I'm guessing it's almost never. And in major college football, it's not going to happen because you would have to knock off. You'd have to have 4 straight upsets. And if you're the gap between number 1 and number 16 in college football is pretty dramatic. I don't know that that's true in college basketball. The 16th best college basketball team, if they have one great player who gets hot, can win some upset games and win the national title. It's not going to happen in football. 12 is too many. The right number is 8. And because the number 7, number 8 team is a legitimate threat to knock some people off. I just don't think 16 is. And if you're talking about adding yet another game, it's good. The schedule's going to get really crowded, and so I would go to 8. But if you're not going to go to 8, I'd leave it as it is.
What about you, Mark? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, there's no reason to add anymore. If you can't get it figured out with your top 12 teams, then there's probably something wrong with the system. You don't need to add anything more to it. Let's kind of ease into this, first of all. I mean, we're kind of there's a lot of things happening, seismic shifts happening simultaneously. You've got conferences realigning, conferences imploding, and now and then all of a sudden you're going to be going into a 12-team playoff system. Baby steps. I'm good with where we're at.
Erik?
I think you have to get to a point where realignment takes a breath first, and then you find out how many actual conferences are there, how are they organized in terms of divisions, and so then you can figure out actually who is coming out, who has played a schedule sort of worthy of getting a playoff spot, and then how many of those teams should there be. So no, I mean, going to 12, I think, was already too many. If you just keep going up, you're going to get to a point where an entire division, the Big Ten West, all 9 teams or whatever it is, gets to go to the playoff. So no, I think you gotta wait a little bit and figure out how this is, because it's not over, right? I mean, the realignment, the moving around, all of that sort of stuff, it's not over, and I don't think it'll stop for a while. Like I think we could be moving a little bit more, because I think there now probably, if there isn't, there should be an urge to let's get this to the final look. Like what does this actually look like? Can we split away from the NCAA? Can you put just maybe 2, 3, 4 conferences together and put things in order of how they can stay for a while? But no, the idea that every off season you're moving stuff around and reconfiguring the entire sport is just nauseating. It's already enough. Like enough of all of this. Enough. I'm could not be more over it.
I'm not over it. Look at, to go from 12 teams to 14 or to 16. Here's my thing. Okay. I think because of the way these conferences are becoming super conferences, where you could have 4 really good teams. In fact, maybe the 4th team in one conference is better than the 2nd team in the other super conference. I would rather see it expand. I would certainly understand an argument that you can't just go from 12 and then say, okay, we're going to do it this way. There's too much planning. I get that. But I think that we're going to get to a point, and I think that time is going to show that there's so many good teams in these super conferences that it would be fun to have them in there, that they should at least explore the idea. I don't think they'll explore it after 2024, but there will become conversations, because they'll start looking at who got left out. And, it's kind of like, I don't want to see teams get left out. I look out here in Southern California. In California, we have the CIF Southern section, where you have playoffs at the high school level, where the top 3 teams in each league have traditionally gone into the playoffs. And some of the leagues are imbalanced, but I wouldn't have a problem if they took 2 teams, 3 teams, and got them into the playoffs, because I think that these super conferences are going to have way too many good teams in them. The record may not show it because they eat each other alive, but I would be open to it. So with that, let's finish up halftime. Your thoughts on the return of Salute to Troy on Friday, August 18th, which is now open to the general public for $90 per person. Are we going, guys, or are we not allowed to go? Chris?
You just said it was open to the public. Are they going to exclude us, or
That's what I want to know.
I mean, I hope we're allowed to go. I can't go because I'll be gone that week. But I think it's a good thing. I never understood why you wouldn't open it up to the entire public. It's a good opportunity for fans to interact with the players, and at $90 a pop, they'll raise a little bit of money for something. So it makes sense to open it up to the public. It's a nice event. If you haven't been, you should go. So yeah, I'm in favor.
Mark, can we go?
Sure, just don't say you're in the media. And
That'd be pretty hard to do.
look, yeah, if they're selling tickets, why not? I like Chris, I won't be in town next week, so I'm interested to know what the menu is. If how close to Salute to Troy is today to what people might remember it as 10 years ago. If they're going to try and bring that back, where you've got the band and they're introducing the team up on stage, and it's kind of got that pep rally feel. And absolutely, bring it back. It gives the fans a chance to meet the team before they strap on the helmet, put on the pads, and start blowing snot bubbles against each other. So I think it's great. I just wish USC would take it one step further and open up practice to the fans and the families one day.
Okay, one day open practice. Hold it in the Coliseum, right? All right, Eric, are we? We're not going. There's no WeAreSC table. There's no. I got to come in. Disguised as Maxwell Smart. What's the deal?
No, I mean it's not a media event, but I like that the football players get to do that. Football players have always, especially in this NIL era, football players have always drawn the short straw in terms of being recognizable to fans, right? They play with the helmet on. It is really difficult during games, unless you're Caleb Williams and the camera's on you all the time on the sideline. It's difficult to tell who these guys are, what they look like, what their personalities are. It's just for a lot of fans, just kind of a ball of rage of players crashing into each other during the game. So something like this, where, yeah, you get to see personality and meet the players, and the fans get kind of a different look at those guys. It's good for all of the stuff, right? The brand building and the connections and all of that. So yeah, glad to see that the players get to go and do something like that. But these guys are they're all so familiar with this now, right? I mean, they've been sort of known entities since freshman year in high school and all that. So no, but glad to see that back, and that, again, like you all said, something the fans can enjoy.
Yeah, I thought the fans enjoyed it. I thought the players enjoyed it. I think the problem was it was such a downer decade previously to Lincoln Riley that people just didn't have the enthusiasm, quite frankly, and it manifested itself. But I know during the Pete Carroll era, it was a beautiful thing to watch the players smiling. They're happy. Fans are happy. My only feeling about during the Carroll era is that they wouldn't invite the general public, but they did allow the media to be there. I don't know if that was a decree by Pete, because Pete really wanted the connection with the general public, and I think it was highly successful. I would say that the argument, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's going to be recruits at this thing, and maybe they don't want the media to get close to the recruits and this, that, and the other thing. But I think it makes for a great story, human interest story, column material that can be nothing but positive. No one's going to sit there and say, "Well, I thought the steaks, the ribs were overcooked." Well, Kulkin might say that. That we have to look at things in perspective. But no, I think that I think it's a general good thing. I mean, Mark would do a great job doing something like that and writing about it. And I think people want to see it. It'd be a great photo shoot. And like I said, if you're going to open it up to the public, open it up to everybody per se. What's the big deal? All right, let's move on. Before we head into the second half kickoff of topics here on the Huddle, reminder, we encourage those of you watching Inside the Trojans Huddle on sites like YouTube and to click the like and red subscriber buttons. Greatly valued, appreciate it. It's free. And you can also listen to Inside the Trojans Huddle on many available podcast sites. And be sure to check out WeAreSC.com and become a subscriber. So it's the second half kickoff, and now we're gonna really talk dirty. Panel, let's get right to the point. Your overall thoughts on the demise of the Pac-12. Why did this happen? Could it have been prevented, Erik?
I mean, it could have been prevented. Everything could have been prevented if you go back far enough, right? Make different decisions. So what I think really, I mean, right, we don't want to talk about Larry Scott. We want to talk about all those decisions, the idea to launch Pac-12 network, all of that. What sped it up was, I think, obviously USC and UCLA going. What the Big Ten was able to do in separating from the rest and really keeping up with the SEC, and in some cases kind of leapfrogging even the SEC in terms of what it was able to pay its member schools. That was the biggest thing. But I think the final like Jenga log that got pulled out and toppled the whole thing, the Big 12 did a really good job when Texas and Oklahoma left at keeping their foot on the gas, moving forward, grabbing teams pretty quickly, and then jumping the Pac-12 to get their media rights deal done early, taking what was out there and just getting it done to say, we're still a conference, we're together, we're moving forward, here's what we have, and going. That really crushed the Pac-12. I think another thing that crushed the Pac-12, they've had such bad branding for so long, right? Like when an official messed up in the Pac-12 and Pac-12 media people started kind of making jokes about it, the conference allowed that. And I don't know how much they could have done, but they could have done more than nothing. So much of that snowballed to where it just did really become kind of a laughing stock conference. And then when it goes time to negotiate with some of these big networks, they kind of know that they can pay 60 cents on the dollar, 70, right? They can undercut that because Pac-12 After Dark started as a joke and the conference kind of leaned into it. And now you're sort of positioned as a second-rate conference and you're doing it on your own. So there's a lot of stuff that went into it. I think, though, the final piece was the Big 12 really pushed forward when they did it. When USC and UCLA left, the Pac-12 could have, again, foot on the gas, move forward. Yeah, let's just bring in a couple other teams. Let's get a media rights deal done and let's announce this and even pretend like we're still a big conference. But they didn't, and they didn't, and they didn't, and they didn't. And then people started getting a little bit shaky, and then that was it, and they were gone. But again, you can go back to 4 months ago, you can go back to a year ago, you can go back to 12 years ago and kind of see the pieces as it went along.
All right, Chris, the floor is yours.
It was inevitable what happened. Eventually, the Pac-12 could have found a way to land Texas and Oklahoma a decade ago, and then it would have been the Big 12 that collapsed instead of the Pac-12. But there are bigger forces that are driving this, and it's why we're not even close to being done. Here's the problem: as college football has become more popular, and as the money, especially the television money, has become bigger, the separation between the haves and the have-nots, or you might say the producers and the not producers, has grown significantly. And it really doesn't make sense to have divisions where you have Ohio State and Northwestern in the same conference. It doesn't make sense. Northwestern is a fantastic institution, but it is not Ohio State when it comes to football. It never will be, and it can't be. And every conference still has those programs right now, except when a handful of the most important programs leave, then there's really nothing left to salvage, which is what happened with the Pac-12. The Big 12 was able to scramble and keep a conference, but look closely at what you have. What you have is you have a conference where the very best team, the very best programs, there may be some years where they have a very good team, But the very best program in the Big 12 would be what? The 6th best program in the Big 10 or the SEC? What's going to happen eventually is you're going to move all of the haves into their own division, probably separate from the NCAA, and the have-nots will go play football somewhere else and of a different type, and they should. Vanderbilt doesn't belong in the SEC. Washington State and Oregon State, while they've had good teams on occasion, they cannot compete with USC and Michigan. They can't. It doesn't make sense for all those teams to be the same. And I know a lot of people are looking at it saying, well, this is terrible. We're going to go to this much smaller group of powerhouses and that's it. And maybe that's terrible, although let me ask you, if you decided to change the NFL by expanding so that it was 3 times its current size, would it be better football or would it not be? Would it be a better product or would it not be? If you brought in a bunch of USFL or XFL or whatever they are teams and threw them into the NFL right now, would that make the NFL better? Because that's what you do when you have the programs that can't compete at the highest level in the conferences with the big boys. So right now, the Big Ten's making a fortune, but you know what? There are a lot of teams in the Big Ten that don't generate anything for that conference. And while USC was giving $100 million a year to the have-nots in their conference, the Big Ten's doing the same thing. Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State and USC, and yes, Oregon and Washington are contributing more than they're getting, so that Indiana and Illinois and Northwestern and Purdue and a bunch of programs that aren't at the same caliber and never will be can get paid a lot of money. That is going to come to an end because it fundamentally doesn't make sense. So you may not like realignment. Realignment is still happening, and eventually we're going to get down to 30, 40, maybe 45 programs that can compete, and everybody else will go do something else with their time because they can't.
Mark, you've been a big fan and you're a media member now. So you get to see kind of 2 sides of it. When you bring them together, was this inevitable that it was going to happen? And is it just incredibly sad to see it happen?
Yeah, well, the answer is yes and yes. Look, the Pac-12's got a lot of history and a lot of tradition wrapped up in its long history. Before it was the Pac-12, it was the Pac-10, the Pac-8, the AAWU, the PCC. I mean, it's gone through its own changes. And, you know, it's not like this is the first time teams are getting relegated or you know, voted out, so to speak. Idaho and Montana used to be a part of this conference. No one considers Idaho and Montana, you know, programs that should be competing with USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington. And the only way this could have been prevented, and I don't even know if it would have happened, just because the TV networks have decided this is the way we want to shape college football going forward, is to do what Oregon and Washington ended up doing to join the Big Ten Conference. And that is, had the Pac-12 treated USC a certain way and said, you know what, they're bringing in way too much money for them to make the exact same amount as Washington State and Oregon State, maybe the Pac-12 could have saved itself with better leadership. By, you know, Chris talked about it. You can't have programs that aren't bringing the same to the table, getting the same amount on their plate to eat. It just doesn't make good business sense. It gets down to that perception, and Oregon and Washington were getting stuck in that perception of, okay, if we're not going to the Big 12 and the Big 10 didn't want us initially, what do we have to do to change that perception that at least, you know, we might not be getting a full revenue share, but at least we're playing big boy football. So they decided to take pennies on the dollar. And that's how the Pac-12 probably should have treated their team. They should have been slotted. This is how much you get.
In other words, prorated, so to speak.
Sure.
I'll just say this. I think it's pathetic. It's sad. But, you know, a fish rots from the head down. And this begins with the Pac-10 presidents, their attitude. Maybe the athletic directors weren't as good, you know, as they should have been in some things. There was a lot of contributing forces to it. Everybody knows that, but it should have never have gotten to this point. Never. That an entire, like when I was talking today on the ESPN affiliate there, you know, how could an entire West Coast conference just disappear basically over a period of time? It just says very little about who we are. I mean, I know a lot of people, they make fun of the SEC. They go, it just means more, but that's true. It does mean more to them. And it didn't mean as much to an entire conference like the Pac-12. And I think it's very, very sad. But life will go on. Life will go on. Panel, Oregon and Washington are, as we know, are entering the Big Ten along with the Trojans and UCLA in 2024. Does the addition of Oregon and Washington into the Big Ten make the 2023 season against the Ducks and Huskies even more imperative for a USC victory statement going forward, Erik?
I don't know. I mean, you have to win this year. Caleb Williams is on the USC team this year. They have talked a lot about needing to win right now, right? This year matters. Next year, they'll figure out next year, right? You piece that together. So no, I mean, if USC wins this year, do you then say, well, we don't need to beat them next year? No. I mean, you want to beat them this year and you want to beat them next year. I don't think I don't think this year has really anything to do with what happens next year. I think you have to win. You want to win now, but you want to beat them now, even if they weren't coming to the Big Ten. I mean, it doesn't matter what they're doing.
Chris, is it more important?
No, I don't think it's more important. I think there are 2 points to be made. One of them Erik made very well, which is that USC has a generational talented quarterback, a guy who's going to go down as one of the all-time great college football players, and they're going to score 48 points a game this year. You need to win big. I don't know if you have to win the national title, but you need to get in the playoff, and you need to play well in the playoff. That's what they have to do. And they have to do it because they have, I think, the talent to do it. And they have a guy who is just so good and so special that you would hate to waste that. But the other thing is that, we're talking about the long term here. Whether USC beats Oregon and Washington in 2023 doesn't necessarily change what's going to happen over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. But USC does start to have to, they need to start separating themselves from some of these other programs. And for far too long, USC was not interested in doing what it had to do to play big boy football, right? I mean, you know that. If you hire Helton and leave him around all that time, you don't really care enough. And because of that, they let a bunch of other teams jump up and pass them by. USC needs to start separating themselves from those programs and joining that elite group of 4 or 5 teams in the country that are just better than everybody else. So should that start now? It should. But if it doesn't happen this year, then it needs to start the year after that or the year after that. But that's what needs to happen. It's stupid for USC to be seen as a peer of Oregon. It's stupid. And it shouldn't happen. The only reason it happened is because USC self-destructed for an entire decade. And so that just needs to end. USC needs to put itself where in its place, and in the process, it can put Oregon and Washington in theirs.
Mark?
Yeah, there's not a whole lot I can add to what Erik and Chris have already said. If you want to label this game as having some sort of meaning, USC like Chris said, they have to kind of reestablish the pecking order that USC is the dominant power. You can't have a program like Oregon. Whatever they're doing, if it's putting a billboard, next to your campus, then when that happens, USC has to take that game and kind of recreate that billboard at the end of the game. And that's whether it's the receiver standing there doing a pose or just pointing to the scoreboard. That's what needs to happen, no matter who USC is playing. But again, because we're talking about recruiting battles and just the nuance and everything that's been going on behind the scenes for the last 10 to 15 years. Look, there is a little bit, there will be a more emphasis on this game. There's going to be a little bit more juice. The players play with a chip on their shoulder, and they can say that they don't listen to the noise, but they'll tell you they also do hear the noise, and they know this game has a little bit more significance because, again, going into the new conference next year, everybody needs to understand that it's USC and then everybody else that comes from the West Coast. They are the foundation.
All right, I'll complete this this question with simply this. I don't think it's going to make bigger emphasis to the players that are playing in the game. We know it's at stake, the playoffs, the Pac-12 championship game, hopefully the title, but it will make a difference for the recruits of the class of maybe 2024 that haven't decided or thinking of flipping. It will make a decisive perception class of 2025, class of 26, because they'll be looking at, oh, they beat them. And I don't think we want USC on the same playing field as Oregon and Washington. And in the interest of time, I'm going to finish the second half here with this question. With the addition of Washington and Oregon into the Big Ten, do you expect the Big Ten will reduce or redo its announced 2024-2025 schedule, meaning the Trojans will face Oregon and Washington annually? Will the Trojans agree to the Ducks and Washington as a protected opponent along with UCLA, meaning they're going to play each other every year? Do you think that's going to happen, Eric?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I think it makes some sense to kind of pod the West Coast teams together and do, one trip up there or have them come down to LA. I don't think that you have to necessarily go to Oregon and host Washington, or go to Washington and host Oregon and play UCLA and have all of them in terms of protected opponents. But I'd also understand if they did that. I mean, Iowa, I think, has 3 protected opponents that they play every year, and that schedule works. So honestly, I would rather play Oregon and Washington than Rutgers and Maryland or Michigan State or Indiana or right, any of those. Like you want to see Ohio State, you want to see Michigan, you want to see Penn State on your schedule. All those other schools, sure, give me 2 or 3 or whatever it is, and then the 3 former Pac-12 schools, that'd be, I think, a pretty solid schedule. So I would be sure, I'd be pro USC playing those schools, because again, if you want to sort of take the West Coast recruiting mantle back for yourself, beating those 3 teams every year is the way to do it.
Chris, what's going to happen here? Are we going to do a schedule redo, an annual game with each one of these teams?
Well, we're clearly going to do a schedule redo, because I assume that Oregon and Washington are going to want to play conference games in those years. But do I think USC is going to make them protected rivals? I don't, nor do I think they should. It's a lot more important to Oregon and Washington to play in LA every other year than it is for USC to play those 2 teams, number one. Number two, if you make them protected rivals, that means you're going to have Washington, Oregon, UCLA, and Notre Dame every single year. And then you're going to throw in the Michigans, the Ohio States, the Penn States, and the others. I don't know why you'd want to do that to yourself. It seems to me that while I'm not interested in playing Illinois or Indiana or Rutgers, you also do need some of those on the schedule if you're going to have a chance to make the playoff. Ohio State has a lot of those. I mean, I know that the schedule's changing now, but Ohio State plays a lot of those teams during the year. You look at Ohio State's schedule and you say, okay, there are 2 teams that might be able to beat them and a bunch of teams that can't. USC is going to voluntarily say, okay, every year we're going to play 5 teams that could beat us. Why? Alabama doesn't do that. Alabama does not play 5 teams that can beat Alabama every year. Not even close. They play LSU. They play Auburn, which is a rival, can sometimes get them. They'll play somebody else decent. And then they'll play the dregs of the SEC, and the SEC has plenty of dregs. If you want, I mean, you can't do that to yourself. So no, for both recruiting reasons, because I don't want to give those teams that advantage, and for reasons of self-preservation, I don't want every single year USC to have a schedule like the back half of this year. Not because it's not fun, it is fun, but because if you play that many good teams, it's hard to get up every week. And if you get some injury problems and you play 3 straight really good teams, you might lose 2 of those games. So if you're going to compete with Alabama, you kind of have to schedule like Alabama.
Mark, what's the solution to this?
You know, everything Chris and Eric just said are 100% nailed it. But what Chris just said, there's some irony to it. To his point, as far as, you know, Oregon benefits playing in LA for recruiting purpose, absolutely. But if this is the direction that college football is going, and we're going to start narrowing it down to 60 or whatever amount of teams, this is going to be your scheduling pool of teams to pull from. So whether it's Oregon or, you know, the equivalent of Oregon somewhere across the country, you know, why would you want to do that to yourself? Well, it's going to be natural. It's going to happen now because you're not going to have those built-in, you know, Alabama games that you were alluding to, Chris. So it's kind of like, we're damned if you do, if you're damned if you don't, but that's the direction that we're going. So I'm caught in the middle right now. As far as travel purposes, I'm with Eric. As far as not wanting to give the advantage to other programs because USC doesn't get anything in return out of it, I'm with Chris. It's like, what are we going to do?
This is why you need to have your Rutgers and your Marylands, and why you should bring in some of these lower teams that are getting left behind, because those are your buy games, right? You give them their share to be in your conference so that they can stay on your schedule.
Why aren't they bringing Cal and Stanford? I agree with you. That's
but here's the thing. That's right. As long as Ohio State and Alabama and Clemson are going to have a bunch of buys in their schedule, you need to have buys on yours. But college football is moving towards more of an NFL model eventually, correct. And there aren't a lot of buys on an NFL schedule, which is why, you know, 11-6 is going to get you in the playoffs because you're playing good teams just about every week. I think that's where college football is headed. I'm just saying, don't voluntarily put yourself in a situation where Clemson plays 2 games a year and you're playing 6. That's a tough spot to be in.
Yeah,
Can you find a historical tie between USC and Rutgers to make them a locked-in opponent, or a guarantee game every year?
Yeah, well, you know, Rutgers is almost in New York City, and so you got the 2 biggest cities in the country. They're rivals. So yeah,
that's it.
I'll just say this. I think this question on the surface of it doesn't look that complex, but I think it is. I don't know whether SC would even agree to a protective opponent like Oregon and Washington. The rivalry is very thick with Oregon right now. There's no way that SC wanted to see Oregon specifically and Washington, in the Big Ten, because that's what made SC and even UCLA exclusive to the West Coast, and it had a big effect, I think, in recruiting and possibly in the future. Obviously, if you beat these teams, that's the best way to equalize the recruiting level playing field, so to speak. But the thing is I think the Big Ten also has to look at marketing. That SC has to play at some point. Maryland has to some point play Rutgers and go to some of these schools. So the best way to do it would not for SC to sit there and say, well, you know what, you're not protective. I think Washington will be a protective school with Oregon. I think they will always rival up now because it suits their purpose, just like in the Great Northwest, as does SC and UCLA in Southern California. But I'm waiting to see when they're going to come out and make an announcement about the schedules of 2024 and 25 and just how Oregon and Washington and SC UCLA work to protective. Obviously, we know SC and UCLA are going to be protective, but will either one of those schools even agree to saying we want you to be the protective schools? I don't think it's going to happen. All right, we're going to skip down to overtime. Some of these questions I think have been answered, but in respect to the people who sent in questions, we're going to give you the air credit you deserve. Question 1. from an SC fan, panel, Oregon just stole Dakota Field from us. Is this going to be a trend? According to the On3 artifice, Dakota Field said, quote, Coach Tosh, Lanning, and Meat have been applying pressure since day one. Even more since I committed to USC. They made it very clear I was the top priority. Any thoughts on that in terms of Dakota Fields? Is it going to be a trend? I say I don't think so. If SC can beat Oregon, it's not going to be a trend.
Play good defense. Play good defense. That's it. Defensive coaches are going to sell that they don't play defense at USC until they play defense at USC.
All right, let's move on to question 2 from Gubo and Palanca. Coach Riley's done an outstanding job so far. We can hardly ask for more, but I will. I'm not a PR guy, but it seems obvious that Riley had some all open practices with players, families, and friends. USC football alumni and national local media in attendance. Well, he simply could knock it out of the park. It would be an atmosphere unmatched anywhere in college sports. Doesn't SC need to pull out all the stops to differentiate ourselves from second-tier wannabe programs that somehow managed to buy their way into our club? I'm not sure that I fully understand this, but I think he wants open practices. He thinks it's a benefit. I'm for open practices. I think most of the guys on this on our panel are for open practices.
Well, I'm opposed, just to be contrarian.
You know, I was hoping that you would step out of line there.
Does Nick Saban have open practices?
Mason Cobb actually commented on this today, and he was half joking, but he says, yeah, you know what, it'd be great because then you guys wouldn't have to ask us all these questions, that the fans could see it for themselves. So I think opening up practice one day out of fall camp, especially for the families of the players, I think would be appropriate. They do it for the coaches.
Does Nick Saban have open practices?
Alabama did a couple days ago. Alabama did one open practice for fall, 2 hours of media availability for it.
All right, so that tells you that the idea that open practices are an important key to dominating in college football is simply not true. Nick Saban does not have open practices. He doesn't need them. All Nick Saban needs to do is win 12 or 13 games a year, which, by the way, is also what Lincoln Riley needs to do. I would like to be able to see practices. I know Greg would like to be able to see practices, but you know what? It doesn't matter if we see practices, Greg. The only thing that matters is if Lincoln Riley wins a lot of football games. And he knows.
I will say this. Lincoln Riley has zero interest in opening practices, in having a bunch of people on the sidelines at his practice. Unless he has some sort of lightning strike and his brain goes 180 degrees, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. There will not be Pete Carroll style open practices at USC, and probably ever. The next coach won't do it. It is not a thing. It is just not a thing that happens anymore in college football, at high level college football.
I'd be curious to know if Pete would do it differently this time around.
No, I don't think you would. That's my personal opinion. I think that, I think it's a disservice to fans that the media, you know what they don't want? They don't want, okay, this is an example. Okay, Mark, you played football, right?
I tried.
Some level, right? Okay, Chris played at the college level. Eric has played sports at some level in high school. I know that. I was the same way. Here's the problem. When you have people that know what they're watching, it gives them a educational look at what they're seeing. A lot of people that watch practice know what's going on when they see it. Okay. Especially media members. One of my friends from another side, Dan Weber, coached it in high school. When he went to practices, he was learning about the players from his own coaching perspective of what was going on. One-on-ones, you're there. They don't want you to see that. It isn't about game strategy. They put that on during the week. But training camp, they don't want you to see a message my message might be different. Somebody comes up and says, "Hey, Greg, what do you think of the SC defense?" Well, if I don't get to see him practice, I mean, the reality of it is you got to take the coach's word for it. And I'm not willing to take a coach's word for it. I need to see it for myself so that I can give an honest opinion. But I respect if they don't want to have us see it. But to me, I need to see with my own eyes. I think I know what I'm thinking. I think I know what I'm doing. They don't want word to get out that they say the defense is looking good. What's Greg Katz gonna say? Well, I don't think they're looking that good. They seem to give up a lot of yardage on the ground. They don't want to have that. They don't want to risk that.
I don't think Lincoln Riley cares what you think about his practice defense.
Well, I would totally agree with you. He doesn't. He doesn't
want distractions. He doesn't want his star receiver out there and have his girlfriend over there on the side talking to him. He doesn't want to have dad screaming at the safety.
I respect what you're saying, but I'm talking in specifics of media. But I understand.
But here's the thing. He doesn't need you to know anything. All he needs is to show.
He doesn't want me to know anything. He doesn't. He doesn't want it.
Why does he care? You don't help him.
Well, why did Pete Carroll care?
Pete Carroll, I think, thought it was closer to playing in game conditions to have all the distractions and you have to overcome it.
That was one, but the other
most coaches disagree with that.
Yeah, but most coaches are paranoid about not wanting anybody to see what's going on in their practices. I understand. Would a teacher want parents to sit in the classroom?
No. Do I want people to be able to walk through my office when I'm preparing for trial? No, I actually don't. It's not useful to me. It's not useful to Lincoln Riley to have us standing around the sidelines. It's not. It's the same reason that all these other high-level coaches don't do it. So I get why the media likes it. I get why fans like it.
And I get why Pete Carroll liked it, because he thought it was a good thing to do from a public relations standpoint, and he wasn't afraid of. I mean, Pete Carroll came up to me one time when I was writing, and he didn't know at the time who I was, and he said, "Excuse me," he says, "Can you tell me who you're with?" And I saw you taking notes. I said, "I'm with WeAreSC.com." He said, "Okay." That's all he wanted to know. He didn't want to, because once he found out who I was, I never had a problem with him. He never see. You know what he told me one time? He says, "You know what? I could have all these practices open," which he basically did. He's 95% of the people don't even know what the hell we're doing. He says only a small percentage would understand a game plan or something that had been instituted. But basically, the fans just want to see the players, do their thing, but they have no deep understanding of what they're seeing anyway. But I do say this: I do respect that a coach should do whatever he wants to do in football. Because it's his program. He should do what he wants. He gets paid a lot of money to do that. And I agree with you, Chris. It's all about winning. It's all about
Pete's the exception. Most coaches are control freaks and they don't want it.
Absolutely.
And you know what?
Absolutely.
And they don't need it for PR reasons. It's not like Lincoln Riley's PR is suffering right now. Like USC fans are saying, man, we won 11 games last year. We're ranked number 6 after dealing with Clay Helton. But I still don't like that guy because I don't get to go to practice. Nobody freaking cares except a very small number of people that don't matter. This group right here, we don't matter. The only thing that matters is that Lincoln Riley wins football games, and he thinks he's more likely to win them if he keeps us away. That's the reality.
Well, he's entitled to that, but I will tell you this: he can keep us away, but he can't keep us away from the game. And another thing he can't keep us away from is when you are quoted, and I think Eric brought this up, the defense looks really good in spring training camp. Okay. That quote will come back to bite him in the second half of the season if the defense isn't playing better than what his quotes were. I mean, if his quotes were, we're pretty, I think we're okay, and they don't turn out to be okay, it's not like the media was able to pre-warn or
Greg, if he goes 8-4, that quote doesn't matter one way or the other. Nobody cares. He has to win football games. None of this other stuff matters. He doesn't care what you think. He doesn't care what I think. He's not afraid. He's not afraid that we'll say. He's not afraid that you're going to say in the preseason, I don't think this defense looks very good. He's not afraid of that. The reality is he doesn't want to distract us. No,
why would he not be afraid of it?
Because if he goes 12-1, it doesn't matter what you thought in the preseason. And if he goes 8-4, it doesn't matter if you thought they looked great in the preseason. Nobody cares. The reality is that nobody's going to care what I say 5 minutes from now. It doesn't matter. But
Well,
they'll care
true.
deeply about the
we
record.
can agree on that.
Yeah.
All right.
I think
wanna-
you overstate when you talk about Pete Carroll coming back and doing it the same way. Social media was not big when Pete Carroll was at USC. The fact that a fan could sit there and live stream his practice, that would not fly with him. I mean,
I agree.
that is so if he comes back and everyone comes in, how do you control that? I mean, I think he would absolutely try to have more control over who's there and what's going on and all of that stuff. To say it would just be kind of a free-for-all in this day and age when those are completely different kind of scenarios with when he coached, I think kind of oversimplifies, I think, how he would handle it.
He would have adapted. He would have
He
figured.
would have adapted. I agree totally with Mark. He would have put in rules, but he wouldn't say media can't come in because you are. I mean, there was, I think, some rules that said you couldn't, text out stuff even in that era. Let's move on here. I want to get through this and give everybody a chance to get their name in here. This is from Big Daddy. With the impending expansion, will the Rose Bowl on January 1st become the Big Ten championship game? Also, is that a SMH or LOL? Any comments to that?
Yeah, I think we already answered that one earlier. It's more of a just shaking your head, hoping that it doesn't turn into an LOL.
Okay, let's move on to question 4. This is from Trojan from the Valley. What are your thoughts, panel, on how it will affect USC recruiting with Oregon and Washington joining the Big Ten? I'll just chime in quickly and say, you win, it won't make any difference what Oregon and Washington do, especially if you play them. Winning solves it all. Questions, comments? All right, from Scott in Gilbert, Arizona. This show is unequivocally my favorite 90 minutes of every week. I can't thank you enough for each of what you do. Keep us informed, up to date with all the information of our beloved Trojans. No question this week, just a statement. I hate the Ducks and everything about their program and fan base fight on. Thank you, Scott in Arizona.
It's a strong statement, Scott. That's strong. Thank you for that.
Okay, from Alan. This is a good, interesting one. Worst stadium SC played an away game, and you were there. Any time frame. I'm going to chime in that I really didn't like the game at Boston College. I thought it was like a JC stadium. Just it was in the rain. It was miserable. I didn't like it at all.
I'll go with K-State. It was a nice atmosphere at Kansas State. The crowd was into it, and I have unbelievable respect for Bill Snyder. But the town is awful. Like Manhattan, Kansas is terrible. And getting out of that place after the game was a nightmare on that one-lane road, and you have 60,000 people trying to get out. It was horrible. Just a terrible experience all around.
Mark, is there anyone that frosted you that you have been to?
No, I'm thinking, and for whatever reason, I did not like going to the old Stanford Stadium. It felt like I wasn't even at a game. It just didn't have that atmosphere. That's the first one that pops into my head.
Eric?
Yeah, the Rose Bowl, the night of the 2005 national championship game is the worst place I've ever been in my life.
Wow. Man, somebody be a corner right.
From MNGT Screwed Up. Coach Hansen was not happy with the performance of the O-line recently. He had good things to say about Murphy and Tarquin improving. So who on the line is not improving? I have heard nothing about Kingston and Monheim as veterans. They should be at the peak of their game. Are there any reports about how these two are doing at their new positions? Comment?
I mean, we've been reporting each practice at their first team at their position. I don't know how much more you want to do.
That's about all you can say.
And there's no above first team.
1A.
Yeah, zero concern about those two. I think it's all kind of lighting a fire under them, right? Like, let's go. If the offensive line coach comes out and says, we were awesome every day, right? That's not football. That's not kind of how these guys are coached. No, I would zero concerns about the starting as long as the starters that top maybe 7 stays healthy through the year. And again, that's an if, and that's why you have to go to 7, maybe even 8, because we saw last year, like they had to go too deep at every single spot, right? The guy who started the year at a position did not finish there. So you need to go 7 or 8 deep. I think they can. I think they're going to get a couple games to kind of work their way in. No concern about the offensive line at this point.
Yep. I agree. Good group.
All right, from Romy in Huntington Beach, California, we're just going to do 2 quick questions at the end of here. After being able to view a small taste of USC's newfound defense, would you say that the average points given up by USC can be revised to 17 points? I realize getting a large lead by the mid-third quarter and inserting the B team will affect its average, but I also have faith in the B's ability, depth throughout. I feel the defense will be a pleasant surprise this year. I guess what we want to know is, do you believe, panel, they're going to give up more than 17 points per game or less 17 points or less? How do you feel about it?
Let's put that in perspective. Last year, if you gave up 17 points a game, you were 8th in the country in scoring defense. Do I think USC is likely to be 8th in the country in scoring defense? No. But if they are, we're going to have a really fun season, boys, because if they're 8th in scoring defense and 1st in scoring offense, which I think they're going to be, then we're going to be in pretty good shape.
All right. I think they will give up more than 17 points per game, but I also think the offenses are more explosive too. So
I think people just really need to understand. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Greg.
no problem.
And Eric was explaining this to me as we were leaving practice. The depth on defense is going to be the difference this year. The defensive line, I mean, the parts are so interchangeable that if someone goes down, you're not saying, oh shoot, now what do we do? They've got somebody behind that guy that they can plug in, and then there's someone behind that guy. So that was the difference between last year and hopefully the end of the season, is if an Eric Gentry goes down, you've got someone behind him now that the staff can really, they truly trust.
17's low though.
Yeah.
There's going to be, and there's, right. I think the defense is going to be pretty good. There's going to be 35s. There's going to be 38s that some of these teams put up. SC is going to get into a couple games like that.
If they're at 21-22, then we're going to be in really good shape.
I was going to say,
Ohio State was 21 on the nose last year.
USC's in the national championship game with that defense.
All right. And where is the national championship game this year?
Pasadena.
The national championship game?
SoFi.
Is it SoFi?
It's in California, right?
Isn't it? And is it New Orleans? No, it's not New Orleans, is it? No. Wow, how pathetic that.
Would you like me to look it up on my phone?
Greg, it's your show. You should have the answer prepared.
It's not. It's our show. It's not my show. It's our show.
It's Houston. It's at NRG.
There you go.
There you go.
Well,
come on out to Texas. We'll drive down together.
Yeah, we'll make sure it's not 150 degrees out there.
It's not in January, Greg. I can assure you.
All right, last question, guys. This is from Diamond Jack 69. USC Nike deal. Notre Dame recently signed a huge deal with Under Armour. Do you know what the status of SC's deal with Nike? It seems we are way overdue for a huge increase. And I'm going to inject this. Chris, this is directed at you, and then you can answer this any way you want.
Okay.
Do you wear Nike tennis shoes?
Do I?
Yes.
I have a pair on right now.
So in other words, you're supporting Nike and Oregon.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that my shoes made.
I'm surprised that you would say I wouldn't buy Nike shoes because they're sponsored by Oregon.
Look, here's the thing. And this applies to movies, it applies to music, it applies to products. I buy a product that I like for the right price. And if I spent my whole life worrying about whether I like the people who are behind that, then there are a lot of there are a lot of movies I couldn't watch and songs I couldn't listen to and stuff I couldn't buy. I don't worry about it.
All right, you heard it live from Chris Arledge. He will support Nike in spite of them being the number one thing supporting the Oregon Ducks. All right. Any comments you want to make about this the question from Jack about SC's deal with Nike? Eric?
No, I mean, obviously Oregon gets a lot of attention for the Nike deal. USC is really closely tied to Nike also. The idea that USC does not benefit from Nike is completely wrong. There is a very strong tie with how much they get. Now, the one thing with USC's merchandising deals that you've always heard is that, no surprise, they're extremely undervalued in terms of what they could get if they had people kind of the right decision makers, I guess, up to bat when it was time for those deals. But it's also not something where, I mean, I'll admit, I don't know where they are kind of in their deal or what they might be looking for. I imagine that they could go out and do something pretty big whenever that time comes.
All right. Well, again, if you have a question or comments for our panel, go to the WeAreSC message board and click on the thread that pertains to Inside the Trojans Huddle, viewer listener questions. And a final reminder, if you enjoyed Inside the Trojans Huddle, please click on the like and red subscriber buttons. We greatly appreciate your support. And be sure to check out wearesc.com and become a premium subscriber. That'll do it for Tuesday's edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle. So until next Tuesday, a big thank you again to our panelists, Marc Kulkin, Erik McKinney, Chris Arledge, and a special big thank you to all of you for watching or listening to Inside the Trojans Huddle. Have yourself a great week. So until next Tuesday, this is your moderator, Greg Katz, reminding you all to fight on, everybody.